But I wanted to raise a few questions, maybe where we all discuss a little bit more about the philosophy of teaching about war. First of all, why do we teach about war, and when do we teach about war? Is it a state of emergency? There is a war in Iraq, suddenly it's incorporated in in our syllabi, or is the war in Afghanistan, World War II? The other thing is, what kind of wars do we teach about? And I tried to put them together. There are popular wars and unpopular wars, in my opinion, because I taught a few courses I developed when I first came to base after 9/11. Women and War, a course on women and war. I taught it a few times. Women, Children, and War. I teach about the Middle East, and every time you teach about the Middle East, even if the word is not in the title, it's in the Middle East. So you can't avoid but talk about them. And these popular and unpopular wars, I would say for now, for the fashion right now, popular wars, World War II continued to be a popular war in high schools, in college, at college level and all of that. It's a good war to teach about. I'm being cynical here. The other popular wars are the ones that just come up on the spot, like now Iraq, Afghanistan. Before that, I remember when I was in graduate school, everybody was teaching about wars in Latin America, and now we don't talk about the wars in Latin America. We put them on the side because we have other urgent wars, which I see a reason for that. There's an interest in that. There are unpopular wars. And I don't know if to call them, and by war here I mean military, because we cleansed the word war by using it in other concepts like the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on, and we don't mean military. So when we are talking about here, I think we are talking about military wars. And when we use the word, and maybe also the role of the language in teaching about wars, like what language, what the vocabulary that we use to describe certain wars, how do we clean something, as you said, like in the language, the vocabulary, how do we talk about death and destruction that is caused by the war? We clean it by using other words that doesn't sound as bad. So maybe we can give more examples and engage in that. Unpopular wars are wars that are don't affect, like don't influence the capitalist system that much, and maybe that, and they are not on the map of the global powers. And by this I mean, for example, the war against indigenous populations all over the world. There are wars on those people for years, and it doesn't come up. When we think about war, we don't think of indigenous populations to talk about them. There is another war that I have plenty of experience with, that the war on the Palestinians. I don't call it Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I call it the war on the Palestinians by the US first and the Israelis second. And that's a war, that's a taboo topic. I guess this is the left forum, we can talk about that, but in other contexts, there is censorship on it. Like if you want to have this as your topic for, as someone in the academia, this is suicide. To do that. And they are really into, as someone who is interested in that part of the world, I'm Palestinian myself, sometimes I want to bring it up. I censor myself about it, like I have to teach the students so much about the Middle East, and it's always on the last week of the class, because I don't want to see the students after that, so I can't say if I want to say something. And also they are prepared and already learned some, or what I assume that they learned, the larger context, the historical perspective, so it can be brought in there. And sometimes, even within that, it's easier to talk about the war in Iraq, it's easier to talk about the war in Afghanistan, but not on Palestine. So, and I'm sure we might have disagreements on that, but that's an unpopular war to teach about. Another thing is about one of the questions that I thought maybe we can talk about, going back to the whole concept of war and peace. I was happy to see the word peace in the title. Because if you look at, I was working once with a student who was interested in human rights issues, and we were talking about it, like about applying for schools and stuff like that. And there are many centers who teach about human rights, but they are centers for conflict resolution, but not for peace and justice, and maybe that's where Fran comes in, which is, my question here, which is that we can discuss, why do we have centers for conflict resolutions, think tanks about the war, but we don't have think tanks about peace? Does this has to do with the capitalist structure, capitalist system, globalization, job markets for as a country that produces the most engaged in the military industry? So it's in the interest of the capitalist system to cause wars for the survival of the system itself. So maybe we can agree or disagree, or maybe talk about that.